إلا الله محمد رسول الله محمد رسول الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله الأمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Dear brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hadith number 9 in the series of Arba'een and Nawawiyyah. This hadith was narrated by Abu Hurairah. May Allah be pleased with him. He said that the Prophet ﷺ said, "What I have forbidden for you, you must avoid it. What I have ordered you to do, do as much of it as you can. For verily it was only the excessive questioning and their disagreeing with their prophets that destroyed the nations who were before you." And this hadith was reported by Al-Bukhari and Muslim in the Sahih, which means that it was agreed upon. And this is the highest level of authenticity in hadith. Abu Hurairah, we know this great companion of the Prophet ﷺ, who narrated the majority of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He is the highest in number of hadiths when it comes to narrating it among the companions. There is Aisha, there is Anas, there is Jabir ibn Abdullah, there is Abdullah ibn Umar, there is Abdullah ibn Abbas. Abu Hurairah comes on top in the number of hadiths. Yet he stayed with the Prophet ﷺ 4 years almost, give or take, because he did not leave the Prophet ﷺ during these 4 years. He was all the time with the Prophet ﷺ when all the companions used to go to their jobs, to their works, to the market, to trade. He only remained with the Prophet ﷺ to find whatever he can eat or drink and learn. And the Prophet ﷺ prayed to Allah that he becomes learned and that he memorizes and never forgets any of this hadith. His name is Abdurrahman ibn Sakhr ad-Dawsi. Usually people know him as Abu Hurairah because Hurairah is a kitten, and he once kept a kitten in his sleeve. It's a pet that he loved, and the Prophet saw that kitten, and so he called him Abu Hurairah. And giving nicknames is something that the Arabs do. So the Prophet ﷺ was known to be Abu al-Qasim, Abu Bakr. Umar was known to be Abu Hafs, etc. The Prophet used to visit Anas ibn Malik, who had a younger brother who was 4 or 5 years of age, and the Prophet used to nickname him by saying Abu Umair. He was addressing him saying, Aba Umair ماذا فعل النغير. So giving nicknames to children and to grown-ups is something that the Arabs do. If you go and look at the hadith, the Prophet is telling us alayhi salatu wasalam, that he has the authority to make things forbidden, and he has the authority to command us to do things. And this is obvious because he is the one that Allah reveals to. And that is why Allah tells us in Surah Al-Hashr, وَمَا آتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. Whatever the Prophet ﷺ brings, you should take. And whatever he forbids you, you should refrain. Similar to this hadith. And when the Prophet forbids something, generally speaking, this means that it is prohibited. And when he orders us to do something, generally speaking, this is a command. That means it's mandatory for us to do it. However, this can be reduced a level if there is another evidence that provides this for us. So when the Prophet tells us, alayhi salatu wasalam, do this, and another evidence comes to illustrate to us that it is not mandatory, then we understand that it becomes recommended. And for an example, the Prophet tells us, alayhi salatu wasalam, had I not feared that I would burden my ummah, I would have instructed them to use the siwak for every prayer. So the Prophet is telling us, alayhi salatu wasalam, that if he had ordered us, it would have been a command. We have to apply it. Therefore, whatever the Prophet tells you to do, it's a must, unless there's another evidence that reduces it from a must into recommended. And whenever the Prophet ﷺ forbids us from something, then it's prohibited, unless another evidence comes and reduces it to not recommended or makruh. Firstly, the Prophet tells us, whatever I prohibit, you must refrain. Now, there are people who consider themselves to be Muslim, but they're not, who say that we do not believe in the Sunnah altogether. We do not take any of the hadith altogether. We only believe in the Quran. And they are labeled as Al-Quraniyun, and this is a false description because they don't even believe in the Quran. And unfortunately, these people are so ignorant that sometimes it's ridiculous to talk to. They don't have any command of the language of the Arabic, because if they did, they would have seen the so many verses that instructs the Muslims to refer anything of dispute to Allah and to His Messenger. And the Messenger is not there, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's dead. So how can we refer it to a messenger? Anyone would know that this is a reference to the Quran and to the Sunnah. And unfortunately, if you use what's known as reverse engineering, if you want to know how to defeat someone, you have to think like them. So if you were to be an enemy of Islam and you would like to undermine Islam, what is the easiest thing or the best way to do this? The best way to do this is to attack the fundamentals of Islam, the Quran and the Sunnah. In the Quran, it's difficult because it is the perfect book. It is the word of Allah Azza wa Jal, unchanged, uncreated. This is the attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah spoke it, every word and every letter of it. So it is uncreated. They cannot fool around with it. So what to do? Go to the Sunnah, because Sunnah has authentic and not authentic, sahih, da'if, fabricated, weak and authentic. Okay, how can we do this? They say the best thing is to attack the narrators, the companions. So they started their campaign and they've launched it attacking the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. If they manage to attack the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, this means that the Sunnah is not intact, because it reached us through Abu Hurairah, through Abdullah ibn Umar, through so and so and so. So by attacking the companions, you attack the Sunnah and you undermine Islam. Without the Sunnah, you cannot understand the Quran, because the Sunnah explains the Quran, it completes what needs to be completed. However, there are also deviant people, and they come and they slander Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, and they accuse the companions like Abu Hurairah, and they accuse and say awful and bad things about the companions. They claim to be from Ahlus Sunnah, and they're not. They are deviant, they are corrupt, and they are arrogant, and they should be ignored and exposed to the people. They come on videos on YouTube, they come in some TV channels, and they are undermining Islam through what they do, and they do not even come up to the level of scholars because they are ignorant and arrogant. So put this at the back of your mind. If you do not abide by the Sunnah, if you do not believe in the Sunnah, if you do not respect and love the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, you're not a Muslim. To be a Muslim, you have to follow the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet warned us. He said, I do not want to find some of you leaning back on his couch and saying, whatever we find in the book of Allah, we will take, and anything else we would reject. By Allah, the Prophet says, I was given the Quran and the Sunnah similar to it. And Allah tells us in the Quran, وَمَا يَنطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَى, He does not speak out of whims and desires. It's all a revelation that Allah Azza wa Jal tells him to say. So even the Sunnah is a revelation, and it clarifies and it explains to us Allah's commands. Without the Sunnah, we would not know that Dhuhr is 4 and Maghrib is 3. This is not mentioned in the Quran. It is not mentioned the percentage of zakat. It's not mentioned the things that nullify your fasting. The way to perform Hajj in detail is not mentioned. And you can go on and on and on with marriage, with transactions, with riba, with the forbidden types of sales, with agriculture. All of these are found in Sunnah. So you have to identify that whoever says that we take the Quran and leave the Sunnah, that he has gone astray. Now, when the Prophet tells us, whatever I forbid you, you have to refrain. This means that you have to stop it altogether, unless it's makruh, then this is something different. So whatever is forbidden, this is haram. You have to refrain from it. If you do it, you're sinful. If you stay away from it, anticipating the reward, you're rewarded. Makruh, or not recommended, if you do it, then you're not sinful. But if you refrain from it, you are rewarded for that. Want to elaborate a little bit more? This is possible, but only after the break, so stay tuned. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. Forbidden things. Give an example. Whatever Allah tells us, do not do this. Whatever the Prophet tells us, do not do that, it's haram. For an example, the Prophet ﷺ once came with silk in one hand and gold in one hand. And he said, these are forbidden for males from my followers, of my ummah. Khalas. We as men cannot wear silk, pure silk that is. And we cannot wear gold, not in rings, not in watches, not in cufflinks, not in buttons, not in a key holder or keyring or whatever. It's completely prohibited for Muslims, for males. And definitely we cannot eat in utensils made of gold or in plates, etc. And the Prophet is telling us, ﷺ, whatever I order you to do, you must do as much as possible. Now, why is there a difference? If I prohibited you to do something, refrain. And if I order you to do something, do as much as possible. Scholars say because the things that we're forbidden to do are easy or are easier than the things we are instructed to do. Because when you are told not to do something, you don't have to do any effort. All what you have to do is not do it. But when you're ordered to do something, this may constitute a burden because it is an extra thing you have to do. And I'll give you an example. If someone tells you, do not enter this room, so simply, you're not going to enter it. You didn't do anything physical. You just did not enter through the door. But when someone tells you, carry this big rock, and it requires some effort from your side. Therefore, not to do is usually easier than doing. And when you look at the things that are prohibited compared to the things that are permissible, you will find that there are so many things that are permissible that overwhelms the things that are prohibited. Now, when the Prophet tells us something, we have to comply. We have to do it to the best of our ability. And that is why Allah says in the Quran, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Fear Allah to the best of your ability. So it is mandatory for us to obey the Prophet ﷺ to our ability. The Prophet says to one of his companions, pray standing up. So this is an instruction. We have to stand up. But if I'm sick, if I'm too old, if I have an injury, the Prophet says, pray standing up. If you're unable, pray sitting down. And if you're unable, pray lying on your side. So it goes down and down when it comes to commands. But when it comes to prohibition, you have to refrain. There are no excuses saying, okay, the Prophet told us about the first gaze. He told his companion when he asked him, O Prophet of Allah, what to do when a woman crosses in front of me? And the Prophet said, look the other way. Isrif basarak. Look the other way. So this is an instruction, it's a prohibition for you to look. And the Prophet says, you have the first gaze, not the second. The second is against you. So what is the first gaze? It's not like so many people, ignorant people think. You find a beautiful woman crossing the road and this man is doing this and is following, and he's going up and down. Akhi, what are you doing? You're not supposed to look like this. He said, the Prophet said, you have the first gaze. And this is the first glance. No, this is not the first glance. This is the 100th glance. He says, I didn't blink. No, the Prophet did not say anything about blinking. He said about the first glance, the first gaze, is the minute you see something, you immediately look the other way around. Because you cannot walk looking downwards without seeing what's in front of you. You will hit a wall. But if you see something, look the other. It's forbidden for you to send your gaze and to look freely. So no one would say, oh yes, but there is an exception. I can't. I have to watch the news. I have to watch this soap opera. I have to watch this movie. And there's this actress. I cannot look the other way around. It's no. If I forbid you for something, you have to refrain from it, as the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wassalam. And this shows you how easy and simple Islam is. If Allah orders us to do something and you can't do it, do to the best of your ability. And this is what Allah wants from you. Allah does not want you to fly or to walk on water. When Allah tells you to pray standing up, if you're old, sit down. Begin your prayer standing up. If you feel you're going to faint, sit down. Allah orders us to fast. No drinking, no eating. If someone works as a laborer, he digs in a farm or he works on the street and it's summer, he has to fast. He says, but by 10 o'clock, I'm dehydrating, I'm feeling sick, I'm going to faint. You have to fast. However, you have to fast from the break of dawn until 9 o'clock. When you feel that you're going to faint or you fall down or you're unable to complete your work, break your fast then. But don't begin the day with having a big breakfast and going and drinking and eating as if you're not fasting. No, this is not what the Prophet said. He said, alayhi do as much as you can. And this shows you how easy Islam is. People who cannot fast, old people, if you cannot fast, khalas, pay the expiation because of your age or because you are chronically ill. The doctors say you will never recover. No problem, you can't fast, pay the expiation. Allah makes it easier. Do what's easy. If someone has a small quantity of water, but he cannot, for example, wash his arm because he has an injury, do whatever you can do. Meaning, perform wudu, perform your ablution. The area that has a cast on it, you cannot wash it, so you rub on top of it. If it's burnt or has an injury that you cannot even rub on it, no problem, perform ablution, which you were ordered to do, except to that limb, and then offer tayammum or dry ablution for that limb that you could not have washed. So you have to do the best of your ability when it comes to commands and when it comes to instruction. Later on, the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wasalam, beware. If I order you, you do it. If I told you not to do it to the best of your ability, if I prohibited something, you refrain from it. And let it be known that the previous nations before you, the Jews generally speaking, were destroyed because of their excessive questioning and disagreement and argument with their prophets. To the extent that they kept on disagreeing, questioning and asking and arguing with their prophets, Allah made things difficult and more difficult upon them. The Prophet is telling us, beware from that. Because if you follow suit, Allah would make life difficult for you as well. And it was reported that this hadith was mentioned when the Prophet said, alayhi salam, that you have to perform Hajj. One of the companions stood up and said, every year, O Prophet of Allah? Now, the Prophet gave a general instruction, which was sufficient. When you come and want it to be specific, then you are making things difficult. So the Prophet said, as-salam, after the man repeated his question a number of times, he said, if I were to say yes every year, then it would become mandatory for every person, every Muslim to perform Hajj every year. And that would be too tiring. That would burden the Muslims extensively. And that is why he said, leave me as long as I did not elaborate. Khalas, I told you to perform Hajj, once is enough. You don't have to rub it in and say every day, every time, every year. And then he said this hadith, alayhi salatu wasalam. So the Jews were instructed to slaughter a cow. Any cow would have done the job. They said, oh, what kind of a cow? And the Prophet gave them a description, narrowing the search for them. Then they said, what color? Why do you ask so many questions? Slaughter any cow. And Allah told them it has to be yellow, that is beautiful and this and that. They ask about what does it do. So Allah limited it until they searched the whole area and found only one cow that fits the description, and the owners would not sell it except with its weight of gold. If they have accepted the request from the very beginning, any cow would have done. But because they kept on insisting and arguing and disagreeing, so the Prophet is warning us ﷺ from doing this. The Prophet is warning us ﷺ from getting into details of things that have no value to us. And Allah did not mention it. So when Allah tells us about His beautiful attributes in the Quran, we take it as it is. When Allah Azza wa Jal tells us about His face, about His hands, about His fingers, about His coming and descending to the lower heaven, about Him being happy, being angry, subhanahu wa ta'ala, we take it as it is. We don't beat around the bush and say, oh no, this is not meant. This is not like this. We don't say, these attributes are like humans. They are like this and like that. We believe in them as they are, but we cannot comprehend them because we cannot comprehend any of Allah's beautiful attributes. Nothing is similar to it, but we believe it as it is. Now, people ask many questions. The boys who went into the cave, they had a dog. What kind of a dog was it? Was it a Chihuahua, a German Shepherd, a Bulldog, a Doberman? It doesn't have or add any value to you. Don't ask about things that do not add value to you, and Allah did not command you to do this. So you have to stay away from what is known as Ahlul Kalam, the people of Hawa, the people of talk, of whims and desires. Follow the Quran and the Sunnah. Do not follow the philosophers that cast doubts and doubts in your mind until you go away from the straight path. Don't be excessive in questioning and going to small details that Allah did not mention and the Prophet ﷺ did not either, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. This is the time that we have allocated for our segment. Until we meet you next time, fi amanillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Allahu, Allahu, ya Rabbi, ya Allah. Allahu, ya Rabbi, ya Allah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. Muhammadun Rasulullah. Muhammadun Rasulullah. أرجو رضاك يا الله، أنت الرحيم يا الله، هبني عطاك يا الله، أنت الكريم منك العطاء يا الله، أنت العظيم يا الله، فيك